Imagine running a mid-sized trucking business right now.
Yeah.
You are moving freight, you're managing drivers.
Doing all the logistics, yeah.
Right. And at the end of the year, your profit margin sits at this razor-thin 3%. So for a truck doing 150,000 euros in yearly turnover, your actual daily profit comes out to about 19 euros and 15 cents.
Wow.
Yeah, less than 20 bucks a day. And then the bank calls.
Oh, never a good call.
Exactly. They tell you that to stay compliant with new emissions regulations, you need to transition your fleet to electric vehicles, which means dropping like $500,000 on new e-trucks and depot charging infrastructure.
Which is just impossible on 20 bucks a day.
Exactly. So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to really figure out how we navigate this incredibly jagged trajectory of EV adoption as we sit here in mid-2026.
And that scenario you just described, it is brutal, but I mean, it's not hypothetical at all. That 19 euro profit figure comes directly from data presented by Johnny Nijanose at the recent Global MOU workshop. We are in this really strange transition period right now where massive kind of macro momentum is slamming headfirst into severe real-world physical friction.
Which makes this the perfect time to look at the massive stack of reports we have sitting on the table today for you. We're synthesizing data from the 2025 Deloitte Global Automotive Consumer Study, Bloomberg NEF's 2036 Electric Vehicle Outlook.
That's a big one.
Huge. Plus McKinsey's consumer sentiment analysis, some infrastructure forecasts from Wood Mackenzie, and real-world fleet data from Driveis. And I mean, when you lay all these numbers out on a table, the story they tell is just completely paradoxical.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on a global scale, EV sales are hitting record highs, right?
Yeah.
But the actual physical deployment of the ecosystem, getting chargers in the ground, transitioning commercial fleets,
Yeah.
it feels totally stuck.
Yeah, and that paradox really starts at the consumer level. So Bloomberg NEF's latest outlook projects that global passenger EV sales are going to hit 23.3 million this year.
Wait, 23 million?
Yeah, 23.3 million. That is an 11% jump from 2025. It's heavily driven by the Chinese market, obviously, but we are seeing really solid volumes in Europe and Brazil, too.
Okay, so the raw volume is staggering.
Exactly. The raw volume is there. Yet when you cross-reference that with the 2025 Deloitte study, you find this really weird trend. Battery electric vehicle inertia remains remarkably muted in traditional Western markets.
Muted? Like people are just hesitating.
Yeah, they are actively pivoting toward hybrids and range extenders instead of going full battery electric.
I mean, I guess it makes sense. Imagine buying a brand new smartphone, but you have to plan your entire day around finding a specific type of wall outlet.
Right.
And when you finally find it, you have to just sit there and wait 30 minutes to use it. They want the fuel savings, but they are terrified of the logistics.
Terrified is the right word. And the McKinsey data puts hard numbers on that fear. Buyers are now demanding an average of 310 miles of range per charge, and a full 40% of prospective buyers, 40%, refuse to switch until a vehicle offers over 400 miles of range.
Oh. 400 miles. But aren't automakers trying to give people what they want? I mean, they're just stuffing larger and larger battery packs into the chassis, right?
They are, but that seems like a fundamentally flawed approach because it hits a physical wall.
Right.
To get 400 miles of range, you need a massive, heavy battery pack.
Right.
And that adds incredible weight to the vehicle. In engineering, we call this the mass penalty.
The mass penalty. Okay, explain that.
Basically, the heavier the car is, the more energy it takes to move it. Which means, to move that heavier car, you need an even bigger battery to compensate for the weight you just added.
Oh, geez. So it's just this endless loop.
Exactly. It creates this vicious spiral of diminishing returns. And not to mention, it drives the sticker price totally out of reach for the average consumer. Furthermore, those large packs require really aggressive thermal management systems just to keep the chemical cells stable.
And even if you magically solve the chemistry and the weight issues to deliver a 400-mile battery, 60% of these buyers are demanding charge times under 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
You are talking about pushing a monumental amount of electricity into a volatile chemical box in a very, very short window, which leads us to where people are actually getting this power. Because right now, the current model relies heavily on private driveways, right?
Right. Around 50% of all EV charging currently happens at home. You pull into the garage, you plug in, and you use a low, steady trickle of AC power overnight.
Nice and easy.
Nice and easy. But as the market attempts to move from, early adopters to the broader mass market, the demographics completely change. McKinsey notes that 42% of prospective buyers simply cannot charge at home.
42%. That is a massive chunk of the market.
Huge. I mean, they live in dense urban centers, they rely on street parking, or they live in multifamily dwellings that just have older electrical panels that can't handle the load.
So the moment that 42% finally buys an EV, the entire burden of energy delivery shifts directly to the public grid.
Yes, it does.
And the scale of what needs to be built is just difficult to wrap your head around. I'm looking at the Wood Mackenzie forecast here, and they say global chargers need to soar to 206.6 million by 2040.
200 million charger.
Yeah, requiring a capital spend of around $300 billion.
And we are seeing developers really push to meet that. I mean, the U.S. public network grew 5% in just the second quarter of last year. But there is a massive technical difference between expanding level 2 chargers and building out DC fast charging networks.
Right, because level 2 is what you usually see at, like, a grocery store or a municipal parking lot.
Exactly. Level 2 chargers make up the bulk of municipal rollouts, but they provide alternating current, or AC power. The vehicle's onboard inverter has to convert that AC power into DC power to actually store it in the battery.
Which takes time.
It takes a lot of time. That fundamentally bottlenecks the charging speed.
So if consumers are demanding sub-30-minute charge times, level 2 just won't cut it. They need DC fast chargers, which completely bypass that onboard inverter and just shove direct current straight into the battery pack.
Spot on. And India is actually a great example of a market recognizing this shift. Their DC fast charger network is projected to absolutely explode from 14,000 today to 1.1 million by 2040.
That's incredible growth. But building a DC fast charging station isn't just putting a plug in the ground, right?
Not at all. Building a DC fast charging station is essentially building a miniature electrical substation.
Yeah.
You are dealing with megawatt-level power draws, and developers who are trying to finance these massive infrastructure projects are highly, highly sensitive to policy shifts, because policy dictates the financial models.
Right. Which brings us to the policy headwinds Wood Mackenzie reported on, specifically the newly passed One Big Beautiful Bill, or the OBBB here in the U.S.
Yeah, the OBB.
And just to be very clear to you listening, as analysts, regardless of the political maneuvering behind this legislation, whether you lean left or right, we are not taking a stance on if this bill is good or bad. We just have to look objectively at how it alters the mathematical inputs for developers and automakers.
Absolutely. The math is what matters here.
So, just looking at the facts of the bill, the OBBB ends EV purchase tax credits 7 years early. It removes the IRA 30C charging infrastructure credit by June 2026, and it implements tariffs that bump EV supply equipment costs by roughly 9%.
And that alters the math drastically. When you remove the federal subsidy for building a charging station, while simultaneously increasing the cost of the physical hardware by 9% through tariffs, you drastically extend the payback period for the developer.
Right.
If a charging station takes 8 years to break even instead of 4, private equity and infrastructure funds are just going to deploy their capital somewhere else.
Because the return on investment just isn't there anymore.
Exactly. Wood Mackenzie projects these combined factors will actually drop 2030 EV sales shares by 3% simply because the supporting infrastructure won't be financed at the previous rate.
Okay, so if individual consumers and developers are facing these financial bottlenecks, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the problem is amplified exponentially when you look at commercial fleets.
Oh, absolutely. The scale goes off the charts.
Right. The Drive's 2025 report on fleet electrification isolates this perfectly.
Yeah.
Delivery giants that utilize a return-to-base model are largely succeeding. Amazon has deployed 25,000 electric vans. FedEx has 8,000.
They have the resources to make it work.
But the school bus sector is this harsh reality check. We have school districts with funding, they have the state mandates, and they have 13,931 actual commitments for electric buses.
That's a lot of buses.
Yeah, but only about 5,300 are actually operating on the road. The vehicles exist, the money is there, but the deployment is totally stalled. Why? The massive gap.
The stall happens at the neighborhood transformer. This is the central choke point. Local electrical distribution grids were built to power, office parks and residential lighting. They were not designed for depot-scale EV charging.
Meaning the grid physically can't handle it.
Exactly. If you park 50 electric school buses in a municipal lot and plug them all into high-capacity chargers at the exact same time, the local transformers and feeders will literally melt under the load.
Wait, literally melt?
Literally melt. The thermal overload is that extreme. So the fleet manager naturally calls the utility and asks for an upgraded transformer and maybe a new substation.
And let me guess, the utility says it's going to take a while.
Try 2 to 3 years. Upgrading grid hardware isn't just stringing up a new wire. Heavy electrical equipment, like step-down transformers, involves really complex custom manufacturing, massive copper requirements, and right now, severe supply chain backlogs.
Wow. And beyond the physical grid hardware, fleets are also discovering the hidden operational math of battery chemistry, right?
Yeah, the weather factor.
The drives data highlights extreme weather degradation. Like, in cold climates, the internal resistance within lithium-ion cells increases significantly, which restricts energy flow.
It hates the cold.
Yeah. And if you combine that with the vehicle having to pull massive amounts of power from the battery simply to run resistive cabin heaters to keep the driver warm, a fleet vehicle's range can plummet by 25 to 50% in the winter.
It's a huge loss of efficiency. A route that a standard diesel truck could complete year-round without a second thought suddenly requires the fleet manager to buy 2 electric trucks just to finish that exact same route in January.
That is wild. And that kind of capital inefficiency leads directly into the operational nightmare of demand charges, right?
Yes, demand charges are brutal for fleets. Utilities don't just bill commercial operations for the total volume of kilowatt hours they consume over a month. They actively monitor peak power usage, usually in 15-minute intervals. And then they assess a massive fee based on your highest single spike during the entire billing cycle.
Okay, let's use a water bill analogy here to help visualize this. Imagine if your local water company monitored your house and your entire monthly bill wasn't based on how many gallons of water you drank that month.
Okay.
Instead, it was based entirely on that one single 15-minute window on a Tuesday morning when someone was taking a shower, the dishwasher was running, and a toilet was flushed, all at the exact same time. Because you drew a massive amount of water in that one tiny window, your bill for the entire month just skyrockets. That is what happens to fleets when all their trucks plug in at once.
That is a perfect analogy. And the reason utilities structure their billing this way is tied directly to their own infrastructure costs.
How so?
Well, to handle that sudden 15-minute surge from a depot full of trucks plugging in at, say, 5.0 TM when drivers get back, the utility has to fire up a peaker plant, which is usually this really expensive, highly inefficient natural gas generator.
Just to handle the surge.
Exactly, just to supply that brief spike in demand. So they pass the massive cost of maintaining that standby infrastructure directly to the fleet operator through those demand charges.
Man. Which brings us right back to that €19 a day profit margin for our SME trucking company. Amazon and FedEx have billions in capital to endure demand charges. They can afford to buy backup vans for winter routes. But small and medium enterprises, the SMEs who actually move the vast majority of our freight, they operate in a completely different reality.
They really do.
So what does this all mean for them? If an electric truck requires a massive upfront CapEx, a capital expenditure for a vehicle, and then another massive CapEx for the depot chargers, the SME's debt just skyrockets. Their solvency ratios completely plummet. Traditional banks look at their €19 daily profit and just immediately deny the commercial loan. Is SME transport simply dead?
It looks grim, but what's fascinating here is how the market is adapting. The traditional financing model is fundamentally broken for SME electrification, we know that. But the lifeline emerging isn't necessarily cheaper hardware, it's the complete restructuring of the balance sheet through as-a-service models.
Oh, meaning shifting the financial burden from CapEx to OpEx.
Precisely. Operating expenses, we are seeing providers now offer charging as a service and even e-trucks as a service.
How does that work in practice?
In this model, an infrastructure fund or a large energy company actually owns the vehicles and the charging hardware. They take the massive asset depreciation and the technology risk onto their own balance sheet. The small fleet operator simply pays a predictable monthly subscription, or like a per-mile usage fee, which is logged as an operating expense. This completely bridges the financing gap because the SME doesn't need to beg a bank for a $500,000 loan anymore. They just need enough steady cash flow to cover the monthly service fee.
That is incredibly smart. But restructuring the financing doesn't solve the physical grid constraints we talked about. I mean, the utility still takes 2 years to upgrade the transformer, right?
Here.
This is where the Drive's Insight platform data becomes super critical. The solution to the grid bottleneck isn't always laying more copper wire. Often, it's advanced software orchestration.
Yes. If you treat an electric truck as just a dumb piece of hardware that pulls maximum power the second a driver plugs it in, you will overload the grid. But if you overlay the depot with intelligent software, you completely change the load profile. Platforms like Drives integrate directly with the fleet's dispatch system.
Meaning the chargers actually talk to the daily schedule.
Exactly. The software knows, okay, truck A just arrived, but it isn't scheduled to leave until 8:01 a.m. tomorrow, but truck B leaves in 2 hours and it desperately needs a 90% charge.
So the software acts as this centralized energy router. It deliberately stifles the power going to truck A during those really expensive 5.0 p.m. peak hours, effectively dodging the utility's demand charges.
Yep.
It dynamically pushes maximum power to truck B. And then at like 2 a.m. when the entire neighborhood is asleep, grid demand is super low and electricity is dirt cheap, it quietly ramps up the power to truck A so it's ready for its morning route.
It's beautiful efficiency. And furthermore, the software utilizes self-healing algorithms. In a physical charging depot, hardware faults are incredibly common. A charging module might overheat, or a local grid node might experience a tiny voltage dip.
Which usually means the charger just breaks, right?
Right. Usually the charger faults out, it shuts down, and the truck just sits there empty all night, which completely ruins the next day's logistics. But with smart software, it instantly detects the anomaly. It automatically reroutes the charging sequence to an operational power module within the same dispenser, or it shifts the load phase, all without requiring a human technician to drive out and intervene.
Wow. And the result of that optimization is just staggering. Drive has found that by flattening the demand curve and using smart energy allocation, a depot can charge up to 6 times as many electric vehicles on its existing electrical grid without needing to wait years for the utility to install a new transformer.
6 times the capacity. You are literally replacing physical infrastructure upgrades with digital intelligence. It is really the only mathematical way we can scale to meet those massive Bloomberg NEF projections without completely breaking local municipal grids.
It really is a highly complex parallel evolution we're watching. Automakers are trying to push the boundaries of lithium-ion density to hit that 400 miles of range. Infrastructure developers are fighting policy tariffs and ROI constraints to build 200 million DC fast chargers. And software engineers are frantically writing self-healing algorithms just to keep commercial fleets running on antiquated neighborhood transformers.
It's a massive puzzle. And despite all that friction, the macro indicators are absolutely definitive. Bloomberg NEF projects road transport oil demand will officially peak in 2029.
That's right around the corner.
It is. And by 2033, they forecast over 1 million fully autonomous robotaxis operating globally, with companies like Waymo already proving the complex sensor and charging logistics at scale today. The transition is locked in. It is simply the day-to-day execution that requires this constant, gritty reinvention.
Which leaves us with a final concept for you to chew on as we wrap up. Throughout this entire deep dive, we've talked about vehicles pulling energy from the grid, taking power out. The next phase of this transition flips that dynamic entirely with something called vehicle-to-grid, or V2G technology. Think about it. Passenger EVs and commercial fleets sit idle in driveways and depots for over 90% of their lifespan. These aren't just cars anymore. They are massive, mobile lithium-ion batteries.
They represent an unprecedented amount of stored potential energy just distributed across every single neighborhood in the country.
Exactly. So when V2G protocols finally standardize, those millions of idle vehicles won't just draw power. Imagine during a severe summer heat wave, when the local utility is strained to the absolute breaking point and everyone's air conditioners are maxed out. The grid will literally ping those idle cars. And the vehicles will discharge a small percentage of their stored energy back into the grid, stabilizing the frequency and preventing rolling blackouts. And in return, the vehicle owner actually gets paid by the utility. You are essentially watching the creation of the largest decentralized power plant on Earth. The car becomes an active node in the global energy market, which could completely flip the balance of power between massive utility companies and everyday drivers.
It fundamentally changes the definition of what a vehicle actually is.
It really does. Keep an eye on how quickly that software scales. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.